My name is Leo. For 2 years, my life ran on the precise, unyielding schedule of the city's red line. Every single night, I would leave my downtown office and catch the 11:40 p.m. train home. The commute was a predictable ritual of screeching wheels, flickering lights, and the blank faces of other tired commuters. It was mundane, anonymous, and safe, until it wasn't. It started on a Tuesday. The train was rattling through the long, dark tunnel between the Commerce Street and Union Square stations when the lights on my nearly empty car flickered and went out. It was only for a few seconds of pure, disorienting blackness. But when they hummed back to life, a man was sitting at the far end of the car who hadn't been there before. He was dressed in an old-fashioned threadbare suit and was staring intently at a silver pocket watch he held in his palm. I blinked, assuming he'd just been there all along and I hadn't noticed. The next night, it happened again. The same flicker of darkness in the same tunnel. And when the light returned, the man was there again. Only this time he was a few seats closer. He never looked up, never acknowledged me, just stared at that watch, his thumb stroking its polished surface. This continued for a week, a terrifying, silent ritual. Each night, the flicker, the darkness, and the man appearing closer and closer. I started to dread my commute, my stomach twisting into a knot as the train approached that tunnel. I tried taking an earlier train, a later one. It didn't matter. He was always there, waiting in the darkness, moving inexorably closer. I was convinced I was losing my mind. One sleepless night, I fell down an internet rabbit hole, searching for accidents on the red line. I found it, a grainy news article from 1978, about a horrific derailment and fire in that very same tunnel. Dozens had died. The article mentioned that one of the victims, a John Doe for weeks, was only identified by the unique, tarnished silver pocket watch found clutched in his hand. The photograph of the watch was a perfect match for the one the silent man held every night. My blood turned to ice. The next night, I got on the 11:40, my heart a frantic, trapped bird in my chest. The car was completely empty except for me. I was a single terrified audience member waiting for the show to begin. As the train entered the long tunnel, I squeezed my eyes shut, praying. The lights flickered and died. The car was plunged into an absolute blackness that felt heavy and suffocating. A wave of intense cold washed over me. I felt an ice-cold skeletal hand clamp down firmly on my shoulder. A dry, rustling whisper, like dead leaves skittering across pavement, spoke directly in my ear. "Your stop." The lights flashed back on with a painful glare. The man was standing right in front of me, so close I could see the dusty creases in his ancient suit and smell the faint scent of ozone and something like burnt soil. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow, dark pits of nothingness. He was holding out the open pocket watch, with a violent, deafening screech of metal on metal. The train shuddered to a halt, throwing me against the seat. The doors directly beside us slid open with a pneumatic hiss, revealing not a station platform, but the dark, graffiti-covered concrete of the tunnel wall. It was an invitation to step out into nothing. A primal scream tore from my throat. I scrambled away from the man and the open door, prying the emergency door to the next car open. I ran through the empty, rattling train, car after car, not stopping until it finally, blessedly, pulled into the light and noise of the next station. I burst out onto the platform, gasping for air. I quit my job the next day via email. I moved out of the city within the week. I avoid all forms of public transportation now. I know that man wasn't just a ghost. He was a conductor, a harbinger, and he believed my ticket was up. And I live in constant fear that one day, no matter where I am, the lights will flicker, and he'll be there, holding out that watch, telling me I've finally reached my destination. I remember that weekend at the lake with a terrifying, fractured clarity, like looking at a shattered mirror. My name is Jessica, and my 3 best friends from college, Chloe, Ben, and my aunt. I had rented an old rustic cabin on the shore of Lake Serene. It was meant to be our last big getaway before we all scattered to different jobs and cities after graduation. The first night was postcard perfect. We built a crackling bonfire, roasted marshmallows, and told stupid stories under a vast stardust sky. The only sounds were our laughter, the chirping of crickets and the gentle lapping of water against the shore. But as we were dousing the fire and heading to bed, I heard it, a woman's voice, faint and ethereal, singing a lullaby that seemed to drift across the surface of the black water. I stopped, straining to hear. The others didn't notice. "It's just the wind in the trees." "Jess," Chloe said, patting my shoulder. "Come on, it's freezing." The next morning, Ben, who was always up first, found a small, waterlogged diary washed up on the pebbly shore. We gathered around as he carefully peeled back the swollen pages. The ink was blurred, but the looping script was legible. It was the diary of a woman named Alara, dated from the 1950s, and it was filled with entries of profound, gut-wrenching despair over the loss of her young son, Daniel, who had drowned in the lake. The final, chilling entry read, "The water calls to me. It is cold, but it promises peace. It says I can be with him again." That afternoon, as we returned from a walk, we found a trail of wet, bare footprints leading from the edge of the lake, across the damp earth, right up to the wooden steps of our porch. There were no footprints leading back. An unsettling mood had fallen over our group. We drove into the sleepy nearby town for more firewood, and the old man at the general store asked where we were staying. When we told him the name of the cabin, his friendly demeanor vanished, replaced by a look of grave concern. "You be careful out there by the water," he warned, his voice low and serious, "especially at night. They say the weeping mother of the lake still looks for her boy. She drowned herself right off that point after he was lost. They say she gets confused, tries to take others she thinks are him, to bring them down to the cold with her." We laughed it off nervously on the drive back, but his words hung in the air that night, fueled by cheap beer and a desperate desire to reclaim our fun weekend. We decided to go for a late-night swim. The lake was like black glass, reflecting the moonless, starry sky. The water was shockingly cold, but exhilarating. I was floating on my back, a little way out from the others, gazing up at the Milky Way. That's when I felt it. It wasn't seaweed or a fish, it was an impossibly cold, shockingly strong grip on my ankle. It felt like fingers of ice, and it pulled me under with incredible force. The world went from starlight to silent, black, suffocating cold. I opened my eyes in the murky water and saw her, a ghostly, wavering shape of a woman in a tattered white dress, her hair flowing around a face contorted in anguish, her arms reaching for me. My scream was a burst of bubbles. I flailed, kicking wildly, and felt my friends grabbing my arms. They dragged me, coughing and sputtering, back to the dock. They were all screaming, their faces white with terror in the moonlight. "We saw her, Jess," Ben yelled, his voice cracking. "There was a woman in the water. She was right under you. She was pulling you down." As soon as they had me on the solid wood of the dock, the presence in the water was gone. We didn't even pack. We just grabbed our keys and wallets, jumped in, the car soaking wet, and drove away, leaving everything else behind. I have a severe case of aquaphobia now. I can't even take a bath without panicking, and in my nightmares I'm back in that cold black water, feeling that icy grip on my ankle, and hearing the faint, heartbreaking strains of a lullaby sung by a mother who just wants her child back. My name is Arthur, and since I hung up my suit and tie for good, my basement workshop has been my kingdom. The smell of sawdust is my cologne. The whine of the saw, my music. It was my sanctuary, a place of creation and order in a world that often has neither. It was a normal, cluttered, happy space, filled with the ghosts of projects past and the promise of those to come. That is, until last winter, when something else, something much older, decided to take up residence with me. It began with harmless, frustrating little things. My favorite chisel would vanish from its spot on the magnetic rack and reappear a day later in a box of old rags. My hand plane, which I meticulously clean and store after every use, would be left out on the workbench, a fine layer of fresh sawdust on its blade. At first I blamed it on what my wife, Helen, calls my senior moments, an aging memory, I told myself. But the incidents became more frequent, more specific. Then, I started hearing noises at night. I'd be upstairs in my recliner reading a book, and from the floor beneath my feet, I would hear the distinct shishi of sandpaper on wood, or worse, the soft, methodical sweeping of a broom on the concrete floor. I was the only one in the house who ever went down there. Helen hated the dampness and the spiders. One afternoon, while searching for a specific drill bit, I opened a drawer that had been stuck for years. Inside, tucked in the back, was a small, crudely carved wooden doll. It was unsettling, maybe 6 inches tall, with mismatched button eyes sewn haphazardly onto its face and a jagged, splintery smile carved into the wood. The craftsmanship was rudimentary, childish. It was nothing I had ever made. I showed it to Helen, and a look of genuine concern crossed her face. She told me she was worried about me, about the noises I claimed to hear. Then she remembered something. "Arthur," she said, her voice hesitant, "when we bought this house 30 years ago, the realtor mentioned something in passing about the previous owner's son. She said he was a strange boy, reclusive, never came out of that basement. His parents eventually had him sent to an institution. I'd completely forgotten." A cold dread began to seep into the foundations of my peace. A few nights later, I was jolted awake from a dead sleep by the high-pitched screaming whine of my table saw turning on by itself in the basement. It revved up to full speed, a terrifying mechanical shriek in the dead of night. Helen slept, right through it, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I grabbed the heavy iron poker from the fireplace and crept down the basement stairs, each step a conscious act of will. The bare bulb at the bottom of the stairs was flickering erratically. The saw was running, its blade a silver, hypnotic blur. A small pile of fresh sawdust was accumulating beneath it, and on my workbench, sitting upright, was a newly carved life-sized puppet of a young boy. Its limbs were jointed, its face smooth and featureless, except for 2 dark hollowed-out holes for eyes. As I stood there, frozen in a state of pure terror, its wooden head slowly, with a series of soft, sickening creaks, turned to look directly at me. I didn't even make a sound. I just turned and fled up the stairs, slamming the heavy basement door and ramming the bolt home. I stood there shaking, listening to the saw whine for another 10 minutes before it abruptly shut off. We put the house on the market the following week. I told the new owners the basement was sealed due to a black mold issue and not to unseal it under any circumstances. I gave up my hobby. I sold all my tools. I can't stand the smell of sawdust or the feel of wood anymore. My sanctuary was violated, and I'm haunted by the thought of what was down there. A lonely, troubled spirit that just wanted to finish its work. My name's Ben, and for me, photography is more than a hobby. It's a form of meditation, a reason to seek out the quiet, forgotten corners of the world. Last fall, I set my sights on a seldom-used trail in the Green Mountain National Forest, a place promising solitude and the raw beauty of untouched nature. It was a crisp, perfect autumn day. The air was sharp and clean, and the only sounds were the rhythmic crunch of fallen leaves under my hiking boots and the distant call of a hawk. The world felt right. For the first hour, it was idyllic. Then, I started noticing the arrangements. Just off the trail, tucked behind a mossy log or at the base of a maple tree, were small, deliberate constructions of stones and twigs, twisted together into shapes that felt vaguely symbolic, almost ritualistic. I dismissed it as some quirky hiker's idea of art, but a subtle, creeping unease began to tarnish the day's perfection. As I ventured deeper, the forest grew quieter. The bird calls ceased. The only sound was my own breathing and a new unsettling noise, a rhythmic, dry clicking. It sounded like 1,000 tiny insects, but it was too loud, too synchronized, and it seemed to come from all directions at once. A disorienting, auditory illusion. I tried to pinpoint its source, but it was everywhere and nowhere. I stopped for a water break, pulling out my camera to review the photos I'd taken. I had a beautiful shot of a small waterfall cascading over rocks. As I zoomed in to check the focus, my blood ran cold. There, in the deep shadows behind the waterfall, partially obscured by a birch tree, was a figure. It was impossibly tall and unnaturally thin, its limbs like knotted branches, its form blending almost perfectly with the surrounding woods. My hands began to shake. I frantically scrolled through the other photos. It was there in 3 others. In a shot of the trail ahead, it was peeking from behind a large oak, a little closer than before. In a photo of a sun-dappled clearing, its shadowy form was standing at the far edge. I had never seen it with my own eyes, yet my camera had captured this silent stalker, getting progressively closer with each image. Near what I hoped was the trail's end, I saw a weathered, rain-stained missing person poster stapled to a tree. The smiling face of a young woman stared out at me. She had vanished on this very trail a year ago, as dusk began to settle, painting the forest in shades of gray and deep purple. The clicking sound grew louder, faster, and alarmingly close. A sudden, intense cold spot developed on the back of my neck. The chilling, unmistakable sensation of breath, primal fear, cold and sharp, shot through me. I spun around, standing not 10 feet away. Its body contorted at impossible angles that no human skeleton could achieve. Was the stick-like creature from my photos. It had no discernible face, just a smooth, mottled plane of what looked like hardened bark, and it tilted its head with a soft, cracking sound. The clicking was coming from its throat. I didn't scream. My lungs forgot how. I just ran. I abandoned the trail and crashed blindly through the undergrowth, branches whipping my face, the horrifying rapid-fire clicking chasing me, sounding like it was right at my heels. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out, bursting from the tree line into the empty parking lot, where my car sat like a beacon of salvation. I threw my camera bag onto the passenger seat, fumbling with the keys, my whole body trembling. I deleted the photos that night, but the images are burned into my memory. I haven't set foot in a forest since. I sold my expensive camera gear. The woods are no longer a sanctuary. They are a place of deep, primal dread. Sometimes, when I'm in my suburban backyard, I get the distinct feeling that I'm being watched from the small patch of trees at the edge of my property, and I'm terrified that one day I'll hear that dry, clicking sound again. When I first moved into my apartment, I believed I had discovered the city's best-kept secret. My name is Sarah, and at 24, I was finally on my own in a gorgeous pre-war building with high ceilings, hardwood floors, and a charming if temperamental radiator. The rent was a steal. I loved the sense of history, the quiet hum of the old building, and the way the city lights painted shifting patterns on my walls at night. My peace, however, was built on a foundation I couldn't see, and it didn't last long. It began with a smell, a faint, cloying chemical scent of natural gas. It would arrive without warning, linger for a few minutes, making me feel dizzy and anxious, and then vanish as if it were never there. I called the utility company 3 separate times. Each time a patient worker would come, wave a detector around, check my appliances, and find nothing. It's an old building. Mist became a familiar refrain. Pipes get weird. Could be coming from another unit. I tried to believe them. Then, the noises began, always in the dead of night. when the city was at its quietest. I'd be drifting off to sleep and be startled awake by a distinct kiss, the unmistakable sound of a gas stove being lit. I had a modern flat-top electric stove. The sound would be followed by faint, melodic humming, a woman's lullaby that seemed to come from the kitchen itself. I would lie in bed, paralyzed by fear, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, listening to the ghostly tune until it faded away. One weekend, determined to fix a perpetually loose floorboard in the living room, I pried it up underneath. In the dark, dusty space was a small, flat package wrapped in oilcloth. My hands trembled as I unwrapped it. Inside was a stack of yellowed newspapers from October 1948. One headline. On the front page of the Brooklyn Daily Eagle. Seized all the air from my lungs. Mother-son tragedy in apartment for B. Faulty stove blamed for gas deaths. I lived in apartment for B. The article included a grainy photo of a woman with a sad, tired face. The building's superintendent, a gruff old man named Sal who had worked there for 40 years, grew quiet when I showed him the article. He polished the reception desk with a rag, refusing to meet my eyes. Every apartment in this building has a story, kid, he mumbled. That one's just sadder than most. People said the mother wasn't right in the head after her husband left. Doted on that boy too much. He wouldn't say anything more. One Tuesday night, I woke up choking, my lungs on fire. The smell of gas was overwhelming, a thick, suffocating blanket that made my eyes water and my head spin. I stumbled out of bed, gasping for air, and lurched toward the kitchen. My only thought, to open a window. The room was freezing cold, a stark contrast to the rest of the apartment, and what I saw made my mind completely shut down. All 4 burners on my modern smooth-top electric stove were glowing a malevolent, cherry red, radiating an intense heat. Standing before the stove, her back to me was a translucent, shimmering, with the figure of a woman in a tattered, old-fashioned housecoat. Her form wavered, like heat rising from pavement. She was humming that same, soft, terrible lullaby. As I watched, frozen in horror, she slowly turned her head. She had the same sad, tired face from the newspaper photograph. She looked at me, her eyes hollow pits of despair. And then she smiled, a broken, tragic expression. I didn't scream, I couldn't. A primal instinct took over, and I turned and ran. I fled the apartment, barefoot and in my pajamas, not stopping until I was on the street, gulping in the cold night air. I called a friend from a payphone and never went back, not even for my belongings. I broke the lease via a certified letter. I live in a new, sterile high-rise now, a place with no history. But the haunting didn't stay in apartment for B, it followed me. Sometimes I wake up in a panic, smelling phantom gas. And on the quietest nights, if I listen closely, I can still hear the faint, heartbreaking strains of a mother's lullaby. My name is Dave. For 15 years, my home was an 18-wheeler. My family, the other lonely souls I'd meet at truck stops, and my world, the endless ribbon of blacktop that unspooled before me. I've seen my share of strange things out on those empty highways, UFOs, ghost lights, things you can't explain. But nothing prepared me for what happened on Route 62. A desolate stretch of road that cuts through the Texas desert like a scar. It was a clear, moonless night, the kind of darkness that feels absolute. I was hauling a load of electronics to California, just me, the rumble of my diesel engine, and the static hiss of the CB radio. It was around 2 a.m. when I first saw it in my rearview mirror, single, flickering headlight. It was miles back, a tiny pinprick of light in the vast darkness. I didn't think much of it at first, but an hour went by and it was still there. It kept a perfect, unnerving distance, never getting closer, never falling behind. I'd speed up to 80, it would match me. I'd slow to 60, it would slow down too. A knot of cold, hard unease tightened in my stomach. This was wrong. My CB radio, which had been silent for hours, started crackling. Not with chatter, but with something else. Underneath the static, I could hear whispers, like the faint voices of children. Too distorted to understand, but clear enough to be terrifying. My heart was hammering. I needed to get a look at this car. I pulled over at a deserted rest stop, the air outside instantly cold and still. I got out and walked to the back of my trailer, my boots crunching on the gravel, and stared back down the highway. The road was utterly empty. The light was gone. A wave of relief mixed with confusion washed over me. As I turned to get back in my cab, my flashlight beam caught something on the grimy rear door of my trailer. There were 3 small, perfect handprints, etched into the dirt like scorch marks. They were the size of a child's hands. A few hours later, still shaken, I pulled into a dusty, all-night truck stop for coffee. An old-timer named Earl, with a face like a road map of the American West, saw the look on my face and sidled up to my booth. "You look like you've seen a ghost, son," he rasped. I told him about the light and the whispers. His face went pale under his tan. "You were on 62, weren't you?" he asked, his voice low. "You saw the beacon. It ain't no UFO. Legend says it's the ghost of a station wagon that got hit by a drunk driver out there, back in the 70s. The car caught fire. A mother and her 2 kids. They burned to death. trapped inside. They say their spirits still drive that road, looking for a ride out. He told me to wait until morning, but I had a deadline. The company tracked our every move. That night, as I drove back onto that same cursed stretch of road, my hands slick with sweat on the steering wheel, the light appeared again. But this time, it didn't keep its distance. It rushed forward with impossible speed. My cab was instantly filled with the acrid, sickening smell of chemical smoke. Through the CB, the whispers became clear, blood-curdling screams of children, a woman crying for help. The truck's electronics went insane, the dashboard lights flashed erratically, the radio shrieked, the horn blared on its own. The temperature in the cab plummeted until I could see my own breath. Then I saw them, faint, ghostly outlines of small hands began to appear and fade on the inside of my windows, one after another, pressing against the glass. The truck began to swerve as if being pushed by an incredible, unseen force. I was fighting for control, wrestling with the wheel. My eyes locked on the terrifying sight in my passenger side mirror, the shimmering, heat-hazed outline of an old station wagon, flames licking from its windows, keeping pace right beside me. For just a second, I saw a small face in its window, a silent scream on its lips. I don't know how I made it through. I just slammed the accelerator to the floor and drove, praying and screaming myself, until the first hint of dawn broke the horizon and the smell and sounds vanished. I delivered that load in California, walked into the company office, handed them the keys, and quit on the spot. I sold my rig for cash and flew home. I work as a mechanic now. I can't drive at night anymore. And sometimes, when I smell a neighbor's barbecue or hear a child shriek in a playground, I'm right back in that cab, with the smell of smoke in my lungs and the sight of those little hands, just trying to get in. I'll never forget the smell of that library, a unique perfume of old paper, leather binding, and the faintly metallic scent of dust motes dancing in the silent air. My name is Chloe, and at 20, my world was a cycle of classes and my job working the night shift at the university's cavernous Gothic library. The solitude, at first, was a blessing. It was a quiet haven to study, a stark contrast to my noisy dorm. The building itself was a character in my life, its vast, shadowed halls and multi-story stacks feeling like a secret world I was privileged to inhabit after dark. But one night in late October, the library decided to show me its true hidden face. It was nearly midnight, and a thick, disorienting fog had rolled in from the nearby river, pressing against the tall, arched windows like a shroud, blurring the campus lights into indistinct halos. I was at the massive oak circulation desk, trying to cram for a midterm, when a loud, percussive thud echoed from the history section on the third floor. I jumped, my heart jolting. It was probably just a heavy book, overpacked on a shelf, finally giving in to gravity. I told myself that, but a deep-seated unease had already taken root. 10 minutes later it happened again. A solid, definitive thump, and then a third. It wasn't random. It sounded methodical, like someone was deliberately pushing heavy tomes off the high shelves one by one. But that was impossible. The doors had been locked for 2 hours. It was just me. My skin prickled with goosebumps. Trying to project a confidence I didn't feel, I grabbed a heavy metal flashlight from the security drawer and took the creaky, rattling service elevator up to the third floor. The doors opened to a labyrinth of shadows. "Hello," I called out, my voice feeling small and thin, swallowed by the immense silence between the stacks. No answer. The only reply was the gentle hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. I walked the aisles, flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. Nothing was out of place. No books on the floor. I was about to dismiss it as my tired mind playing tricks when I noticed it, a single leather-bound yearbook from 1968, left open on a reading table. I nudged it with my finger. The pages were open to the student portraits. I didn't think much of it. Just a patron's forgotten book. A few nights later, the true haunting began. I was shelving returns when I heard it, faint weeping, so soft I thought it was the wind whistling through a window frame. But it was a woman's cry, full of despair, and it was coming from the third floor. My blood ran cold. I forced myself to go up, my footsteps deafening in the silence. The weeping stopped as soon as I stepped off the elevator. And there, on the same table, was the same 1968 yearbook. It was open to the exact same page, to the smiling black and white face of a girl with bright eyes and a hopeful expression. Her name was Annabelle Lee. The next day I couldn't shake the image of her face. I found Mr. Harrison, the elderly head librarian, in his dusty office. I mentioned the strange noises in the yearbook. His face, usually so cheerful, clouded over. He took off his glasses and polished them slowly. "Annabelle Lee ... he murmured, his voice low. "A tragic story, a ghost story, some say. She was a brilliant student, top of her class, but the pressure got to her. She took her own life in this library, right up there on the third floor, just a week before graduation. Jumped from the balcony. Other night staff. Over the years they've seen things, heard things. Most don't stay long. That night, a violent thunderstorm broke over the campus. The lights flickered, and then with a loud buzz, the entire library was plunged into darkness. The emergency lights kicked on, casting long, distorted, terrifying shadows. My heart was in my throat. I was trapped at the main desk, and my eyes were drawn to the third-floor balcony. In the dim red glow of an emergency exit sign, I saw her, a figure, standing at the far end of an aisle, her back to me. She was slowly, deliberately turning the pages of a book. My breath caught in my throat. It was her, Annabelle, as I stared. Frozen in terror, the main lights flickered and then roared back to life with a hum. The figure was gone. Shaking, I looked down at my desk and screamed. The 1968 yearbook was sitting directly in front of my textbook. It was open to Annabelle's smiling picture, and scrawled across her face in fresh, glistening black ink were 2 words. The ink still wet and smelling of chemicals. Don't leave. I instinctively touched the ink, and it smeared under my trembling finger. I didn't even clock out. I grabbed my bag and ran out into the stormy night, leaving the library and its secrets behind forever. Now, I can't study in quiet places. Every time I do, out of the corner of my eye, I see a flicker of movement, and I can almost hear the faint, heartbreaking sound of a girl quietly weeping. I remember that night with a clarity that still chills me. It was a thick, humid August evening, the kind where the air feels heavy in your lungs. We were in our new house, a 2-story colonial we had sunk every last penny and dream into. My name is Mark, and at 35, I finally felt like I'd made it. I had my wife Anna, whose laughter was the real soul of the house, and our 6-year-old daughter Lily. My graphic design work allowed me to be at home, so I was intimately familiar with the house's orchestra of sounds, the groan of the pipes, the sigh of the foundation settling. But this night, a discordant note was played that threw everything off dash key. That was well past 1 in the morning. A summer storm was brewing, the sky occasionally trembling with distant thunder. Anna and Lily were long asleep upstairs, but a restless energy kept me downstairs, flipping through silent television channels. The old oak in the backyard, which we'd loved for its majestic canopy, began to scratch its branches against Lily's window, a sound like skeletal fingers tapping on the glass. That's when I first heard it, a faint, rhythmic scratching. But it wasn't from the tree, it was coming from inside the walls. I muted the TV, straining to listen. It stopped. "It's just a mouse," I whispered to myself, a desperate attempt at logic. I went to the kitchen for a glass of water, telling myself I'd buy some traps in the morning. But as I stood by the sink, I heard it again, this time more distinct, more deliberate. It was the sound of fingernails dragging slowly, purposefully, across drywall. It was coming from the living room wall, the one that backed onto the main staircase. My blood ran cold. The silence of the house suddenly felt predatory. I crept out of the kitchen and down the main hallway, every floorboard announcing my presence. I noticed a sliver of light from under Lily's bedroom door, and my heart hammered against my ribs. She should be sound asleep. I pressed my ear to the cool wood of her door and heard her whispering. It wasn't the one-sided chatter she sometimes had with her stuffed animals. It was conversational, with pauses, as if she were listening for a reply. I pushed the door open gently. The room was bathed in the soft glow of her unicorn nightlight. Lily was sitting bolt upright in her bed, her eyes fixed on the wall adjacent to the hallway, the very wall where the scratching sound was now the loudest. It was a dry, insistent scraping. "The new friend is shy," she said, her voice small and serene, not even turning to look at me. The normalcy of her tone in the face of that sound was the most terrifying part. A wave of adrenaline hit me. I scanned the room, my eyes darting into every shadow. I flung open her closet door, dropped to my knees to check under her bed, even pulled back the curtains. Nothing. There was no one there. "Who's your friend, sweetie?" I asked, my own voice a strained, trembling thing. "He lives in the wall," she whispered, her gaze unwavering. "He's sad because he can't get out." The scratching stopped the moment I entered the room. I couldn't sleep that night, sitting in the hallway chair watching Lily's door until dawn. The next morning, while Anna was at the grocery store, I went into Lily's room, armed with a utility knife and a desperate need for answers. I remembered a loose panel in her closet from when we'd painted. I pulled it away, and a cascade of stale, dusty air rushed out. Shining my phone's flashlight into the dark space between the studs, I saw them. Old, childlike drawings were scribbled all over the back of the drywall. They depicted a stick figure family, a mother, a father, a girl. But in every drawing, a fourth figure, a small boy, was drawn separately, trapped inside a crudely sketched box. In one, the box had bars. In another, it was scribbled over with black crayon, almost completely obscured. A few days later, our elderly neighbor from across the street, Mrs. Gable, came by with a welcome pie. She was sweet, with kind eyes that had seen decades unfold. On our quiet street, she admired the house, and then her expression turned somber. "It's good to see a family here again," she said, shaking her head slowly. "The last ones, such a tragedy." I felt a knot form in my stomach. Their little boy Thomas, he was never well. A strange, reclusive child. His parents were very private. Then he got sick very suddenly. Wasted away to nothing, they said. He died right up there, in his room. She pointed a frail finger toward what was now Lily's bedroom. The family moved out less a month after the funeral. Couldn't bear the memories, I suppose. That night, the scratching returned with a terrifying new intensity. It was no longer just in the walls. It was under the floorboards, in the ceiling. It was everywhere. We were woken from a dead sleep by a loud, violent bang from Lily's room. We bolted down the hall to her door, but the knob wouldn't turn. It was locked from the inside. We could hear the scratching now, a frantic, desperate clawing, and worse, we could hear Lily's thin, terrified sobs. "He wants to show me his box," she shrieked. "I don't want to go in the box." Forgetting everything but my daughter, I threw my shoulder against the door again and again, the wood groaning until the frame finally splintered and it burst inward. The room was unnaturally cold, the air frigid and sharp. The window was thrown wide open, the curtains whipping violently in the wind, even though the storm had not yet broken. Lily was huddled in the corner of her bed, pointing a trembling finger at the floor, and there etched into the polished hardwood floorboards next to her bed was a fresh, deep scratch, a single, long line. It was the beginning of a box. We packed a few bags and left that night, telling ourselves we were just going to a hotel until we could get a priest, an exterminator, anyone. But we knew we were lying. We never went back. We abandoned the house and our dream. We now live in a small apartment far away. Anna and I are in therapy, and Lily doesn't consciously remember the boy in the wall. But sometimes I'll find her staring at a blank wall, her head tilted as if listening, and she refuses to sleep with her closet door closed. She says she doesn't want to trap anyone inside.